At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? My name's Carol. Let's begin.
The thing about being the only human in a lecture hall full of aliens was that you could never quite predict what would cause the screaming. Elliot Graves learned this lesson repeatedly over his first 3 weeks at the Greater Galactic University on Proxima Hub. The time he'd yawn caused a minor evacuation. Apparently, displaying one's dental arsenal was a threat display among most civilized species. The morning he'd stretched after a long study session, 3 students fainted, convinced he was preparing to pounce. And during a memorable third shift lecture, he'd sneezed, and Professor Threx activated the biochemical containment safeguards, certain Elliot had deployed some spore-based weapon. So, when the entire Xenobotany 301 class erupted into a cacophony of shrieks and clicks during Professor Kerflox's after-meal lecture, Elliot's first thought was to check if he'd done something unconsciously threatening again. A quick mental inventory. He sat still, hadn't yawned, hadn't stretched, and definitely hadn't sneezed. He was just eating his lunch. And thus, we see the true horror of the Malus Domestica, colloquially known as the Soul Apple of Terra. Professor Kerflox was saying, his 4 upper limbs weaving complex gestures in the air, while his primary arms gripped the podium. The Skitterman silicate shell caught the lecture hall's lights, scattering them into shifting rainbows that would have been beautiful if his Shellicere hadn't clicked with each emphasized syllable. A fruit so toxic that its very seeds contain cyanogenic glycosides. The flesh itself is laden with malic acid, a compound capable of dissolving soft tissues on contact. The holographic projection behind him displayed what Elliot recognized as a heavily edited photo of an apple tree. Though someone had added ominous purple flames around the fruit, and what appeared to be tiny screaming faces in the bark. But the chemical terror pales before its history, Kerflox continued, his voice dropping to what he clearly thought was an ominous whisper, but came across more like someone gargling gravel. The archive speaks of the first contact catastrophe with the glib glob. The first xenobiologist to analyze this fruit took one bite. Just one. And their gelatinous form catastrophically destabilized. She spent the rest of her short, agonizing days trying to warn others, spreading the tale of the curse across the galaxy. Crunch. Every head in the lecture hall, or whatever served as a head for some of the more exotic species, swiveled toward the back row. Elliot looked up from his Granny Smith apple, a chunk of it still between his teeth. 300 eyes, photoreceptive pits, optical stalks, and various other sensory organs stared at him in absolute horror. "Ah, come on," muttered the captain in Elliot's head, his voice a low rasp, like static over a comm channel. Elliot sometimes wished he'd deleted the old combat suite personality forks, but after all this time, they felt like family. "You stepped in it now, son. Tactical retreat. Immediately." "No way," Glitch chimed in, practically thrumming with glee. "This is hilarious. Take it on the right. Bigger. Make eye contact with the professor while you do it." The whisperer just hissed anxiously, a sound like static that made the fine hairs on his arm stand up. Professor Kerflox's Shellicere stopped moving entirely. The lecture hall's ambient hum seemed to vanish. All Elliot could hear was the frantic thumping of his own heart. "Is that..." The professor's voice had lost all its theatrical boom. "Young Terran, is that a soul apple?" Elliot swallowed. "This? It's just an apple, Granny Smith. They were on sale at the human supply shop in Sector 12. He held it up helpfully. Want a slice? The student nearest to him, the gelatinous glib-glob whose encounter suit's joints locked with an audible click, fell backward off their chair. The rest of the row evacuated, each student moving with a swift, rehearsed terror that kept them from trampling one another. "You're eating," Kerflock said slowly, as if trying to reconcile contradictory data. "A soul apple. Raw. Without protective equipment? Or antidotes?" "I mean, I washed it first," Elliot offered. The apples from the shop were okay, but they were hydroponic synthetics, preserved for long-haul travel. They always had a slightly sterile taste to them. The professor's primary arms trembled. His secondary manipulators clicked against each other, a frantic, uncontrolled rhythm that Elliot recognized as distress. "Class dismissed!" Kerflock shrieked. "Evacuate! Initiate contamination safeguards! Nobody touch anything the Terran has touched!" The rush for the exits would have been comedic if Elliot hadn't been genuinely concerned someone might get trampled, or squished in the case of the more malleable students. As the dust settled, only 4 beings remained in the lecture hall. Professor Kerflock stood frozen at his podium, his posture shifting from rigid fear to a forward-leaning inquisitiveness. He watched Elliot, clearly expecting him to dissolve at any moment. The glib-glob who'd fallen was still on the floor, the currents in their translucent form churning frantically. Still conscious, then, just shocked. And against all reasonable survival instincts, a reptilian cloven with large yellow eyes had actually moved closer, though he maintained what he probably thought was a safe distance of 3 rows. "You're gonna die?" the cloven asked, his voice rising at the end in the characteristic questioning tone of his species. "The flesh-dissolving enzymes are eating you from the inside? You perhaps have minutes to live?" Elliot took another bite of his apple, mainly because he didn't know what else to do with it at this point. "It's just fruit. Humans have been eating these for thousands of years." "That can't be," Kerflock said, finally finding his voice again. He scuttled down from the podium, his posture a mixture of terror and intense inquiry. "The archive clearly states the toxicity levels, the glib-glob incident." "Look," Elliot said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe that first glib-glob had an allergy. Apples aren't toxic to humans. Well, the seeds have a tiny bit of cyanide, but you'd have to eat a whole bushel of them to maybe feel sick." "A bushel of concentrated death toxin?" The cloven had somehow gotten even closer, quivering with curiosity. "And Terrans consume this recreationally? As a test of endurance? To prove genetic superiority?" No, because they taste good and they're healthy." The glib-glob on the floor made a sound like a clogged drain attempting to speak. Their encounter suit's vocalization unit finally kicked in, producing a flat, mechanical tone, completely at odds with the violent churning of their inner substance. "Requesting permission to document. For science." Document what?" Elliot asked. "Your death. For science." I'm not dying." "The Terran is clearly delusional," Kerflock announced, his academic excitement now fully eclipsing his fear. "The toxins have reached his nervous system. Young Terran. Graves, isn't it? What antitoxin did you take? We need to know for the medical report." "I took a multivitamin this morning," Elliot offered weakly. The professor's shellrissay clicked again. 20 minutes later, Elliot found himself in the university's medical center, surrounded by increasingly frustrated doctors of various species, who couldn't understand why he wasn't dead, dying, or at least mildly inconvenienced. "Blood pressure normal for a Terran," announced Dr. Vril. A Morvac whose fungal filaments were practically tied in knots with confusion. no signs of tissue degradation. No indication of neurotoxic response. It's as if he's immune? Suggested Kerflox, who'd insisted on accompanying them to witness what he called an unprecedented xenobiological event. As if the fruit isn't toxic at all, Dr. Vril corrected. Dr. Vril's words echoed in the sterile medbay. Kerflox froze mid-scuttle, his limbs locked in place. That's what I've been trying to tell you, Elliot said from his seat on the examination table. He'd finished his apple during the walk over, which had caused 2 more students to faint and 1 to call their spawning progenitor to say goodbye. Ignore them, the captain advised. Bunch of worrywarts. No strategic thinking at all. We should convince them that we're immortal, Glitch suggested. Tell them apples are what give humans their power. Start a cult. The whisperer hissed again, the sound doing nothing for Elliot's growing headache. The glib-glob from the lecture, who'd introduced themselves as Pentavlar, followed them to the medical center and now hovered near the door, their recording stylus skittering across a datapad. The turbulent currents in their translucent form had organized into what looked like a spiral pattern. Hypothesis, Penta's suit announced in its monotone voice. Terran biology is fundamentally incompatible with standard galactic biochemistry. What is toxic to 99.9% of known sapient species is nutritious to humans. That's the most terrifying thing I've ever heard? The Cloven, who'd tagged along uninvited, added. Your entire planet is poison? You evolved eating poison? You are poison? We aren't poison, Elliot protested. We just have different dietary needs. Different, Kerflox repeated, his tone suggesting he'd found a new favorite word. Yes, different. Like how a black hole is different from the interstellar medium. Dr. Vril pulled up a holographic display, showing Elliot scan results next to a standard galactic baseline. The variance is significant. The data we've gathered from the long-range scans of Terran outposts didn't prepare us for this. Your stomach acid alone could dissolve most species' exoskeletons. Your liver appears to be a chemical processing plant that would be classified as industrial equipment on most worlds, and your gut bacteria. They trailed off, filaments curling in distress. Your gut bacteria could be classified as a biological weapon under 19 different treaties. But they help me digest food, Elliot said weakly. Digest poison, you mean, Kerflox corrected. This explains everything. The reports of Terrans consuming ethanol for recreation. The rumors about something called spicy food that literally causes pain while eating, the horrifying practice of deliberately introducing controlled diseases into their young to build immunity. Vaccines? Elliot bit back the explanation. It was useless. You know what? Sure. We're poison-eating, disease-cultivating, acid-blooded monsters. Can I go now? I have a theoretical spacecraft design course in an hour. Absolutely not! Kerflox's primary arm spread wide in a gesture of academic excitement. This is unprecedented. A sapient species from a death world, actively consuming death world flora, surviving, and even thriving on the biochemical chaos you, Mr. Graves, are going to be the subject of my next 20 papers. Oh, good, Elliot muttered. I'm gonna be famous for eating lunch. Tell him we also drink the blood of our enemies, Glitch suggested unhelpfully. Really lean into the whole death world thing. We do not drink blood, Elliot said out loud, then realized everyone was staring at him. I mean, I don't. Humans don't. Generally, except for that one pudding in the UK, but that's different. Blood pudding? Penta's suit vocalizer crackled, the monotone rising in pitch as if the machine itself was horrified. The currents in their gel form had formed into what looked like tiny screaming faces. It's not. We don't. It's a cultural thing. Perhaps, Dr. Vril interrupted, clearly desperate to end this conversation before it got worse. We should simply update the Terran dietary files and move on. Mr. Graves appears to be in perfect health by Terran standards, which are apparently standards that would kill the rest of us, but nevertheless. Kerflox's Shelversay clicked thoughtfully. Yes, of course, but I'll need to adjust my entire curriculum. My whole section on Death World flora is apparently just Terran grocery list. This is embarrassing, Elliot suggested. Revolutionary, Kerflox declared. Young Graves, you've just overturned 3 centuries of xenobotanical theory by eating your lunch. Do you have any idea how significant this is? Significant enough to let me go to my next class? Don't be ridiculous. You're having dinner in the cafeteria tonight, yes? I need to observe. For science. Bring more apples. The news of the apple incident, as it was being called, tore through the university's networks faster than a Gantian fever. By the time Elliot made it back to his dormitory that evening, a small crowd had gathered outside his door. He briefly considered turning around and finding somewhere else to sleep, but the captain wouldn't hear of it. No retreat, soldier, the voice grumbled. You got the high ground here. They're on your territory now. Our territory, Glitch corrected. And we should demand a fee. Come see the amazing Death World Terran. Watch him consume toxic substances, marvel as he doesn't die. Elliot pushed through the crowd, muttering apologies and avoiding their gazes. Most of them scattered when he got close enough, though he noticed Pentavlar following at what they probably considered a safe distance, recording stylus at the ready. His roommate, Taro, was already in their shared quarters when Elliot entered. The Cloven was pressed against the far wall, large yellow eyes unblinking. You alive? Taro asked. The medical center didn't quarantine you? You're not experiencing organ failure? Your blood hasn't turned to acid, or more acid than usual? I'm fine, Taro. Elliot dropped his bag on his bed and collapsed next to it. It was just an apple. Just an apple? Taro's voice rose to a thin shriek of disbelief. You consumed a Class 4 toxin in public without safety equipment? You're just calling it just anything? On my world, we call it lunch. Taro was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Your world is insane? Your entire species is insane? You're insane? Probably, Elliot admitted. Yes. And definitely yes. He's not wrong, Glitch chimed in. We are pretty crazy. Remember that time we... Not now, Elliot muttered. Are you talking to me? Taro asked. Or are you experiencing auditory hallucinations? Is that a symptom of apple poisoning? I'm just tired. It's been a long day of not dying from fruit consumption. Taro shifted slightly, a movement Elliot had learned meant curiosity was overcoming caution. Do you have more? Apples? Could I observe one from a distance? With proper containment safeguards? Elliot sat up and pulled his lunch bag out of his backpack. He had 3 more apples, 2 galas, and a Honeycrisp he'd been saving for dessert. He pulled out one of the galas and held it up. Taro immediately backed up until he hit the wall. That's close enough? Maybe too close. Should I get protective equipment? It's not gonna jump out and attack you. You don't know that? It could have defense mechanisms. Terran flora is notoriously aggressive. Elliot set the apple on his desk, halfway between their beds. There. It's not moving. It's not secreting anything. It's just sitting there, being an apple. Taro edged closer, moving in small, cautious increments. It's smaller than the projection suggested? Less purple. Why isn't it screaming? Screaming? The educational materials showed screaming fruit? Souls trapped inside? Someone has been seriously messing with your textbooks. Elliot picked up the apple and, before Taro could retreat, took a large bite. The crunch echoed in their small room. Taro made a sound like steam escaping from a kettle. You just, without warning, that's so dangerous. Wanna try some? Do I wanna die? No. Do I have a death wish? Also no. Am I curious about the texture of crystallized death? Maybe a little? Elliot cut a small slice with his pocket knife, which caused another round of alarm when Taro realized humans casually carried stabbing implements and offered it on his palm. Taro stared at it like it might explode. If I die, you'll tell my clutch siblings it was for science? You're not gonna die. That's what every human probably says, right before someone dies. Despite his protests, Taro's curiosity won. He darted forward, snatched the apple slice, and retreated to his side of the room in one fluid motion. He held it up to the light, examining it from every angle. It's not dissolving on the floor? That's promising. It smells sweet? Is sweet the right word? I don't have a reference for this. Just try it. Taro's unblinking eyes fixed on Elliot. Then, with a surge of resolve usually reserved for charging into battle, he popped the entire slice into his mouth. His eyes somehow got even wider. It's crunchy and juice generating, and the flavor is... He paused, processing. Why does it make my mouth feel different? Is that the acid? Am I dying? This is what dying tastes like? It's actually quite pleasant? That's called sweet and tart. The sensation is from the natural sugars and acids. Terrans have words for poison categories? Taro sat down heavily on his bed. This explains so much? Your whole culture makes sense now? You're all insane because you eat insanity fuel? A soft chime from the door interrupted them. Elliot opened it to find Pentavlar hovering outside, their gel form practically vibrating within their encounter suit. Apologies for the intrusion, their suit announced. I observed you sharing the death fruit with your roommate. May I collect a sample? For my research paper? Which I'm calling Apocalypse by Snack, a Terran case study? That's a terrible title, the captain grumbled. I love it, Glitch countered. We should trademark it. Elliot cut another slice and handed it to Penta, who produced a specimen container from somewhere and carefully secured it. You're not gonna eat it? Taro asked. I lack the appropriate digestive mechanisms. Also, I enjoy being alive. The currents in Penta's form swirled in what might have been amusement. But I will run extensive tests. For science. Glad I could contribute to science by eating fruit. Oh, this is just the beginning, Penta's suit said, somehow managing to sound ominous despite its monotone delivery. Professor Kerflox has announced that tomorrow's lecture will cover Terran carnivory. He's particularly excited about something called beef jerky. Elliot groaned. The next morning came too soon, heralded by Taro's increasingly agitated questions about whether Elliot planned to bring more death snacks to class. Elliot had tried to explain that beef jerky wasn't any more dangerous than apples, but this had backfired spectacularly when Taro learned that humans regularly consumed the flesh of creatures that, on Earth, could and would eat humans right back. So you're saying, Taro had asked, his voice reaching frequencies that made the bones in Elliot's jaw ache, that you eat the things that eat you? That's recursive predation? That's insane even by Death World standards? It's called the food chain. It's called mutually assured digestion? Now, sitting in the same back row in Xenobiology 301, Elliot tried to make himself as small as possible. The lecture hall was packed. Word had gotten out about yesterday's demonstration, and students from other courses had crammed in to watch the Death Worlder in action. He noticed several recording devices pointed his way. Don't even think about not eating, Glitch whispered. This is our moment, we're gonna be famous! Famous for being a freak show, Elliot muttered. Best kind of famous, Glitch replied cheerfully. Professor Kerflock scuttled to the podium with more energy than Elliot had ever seen him display. His Shelrisai clicked in what Elliot was coming to recognize as academic excitement. Students, esteemed colleagues, curious onlookers hoping to witness another Death World demonstration. He spread all his arms wide. Today, we delve into one of the most disturbing aspects of Death World ecology, active carnivory. The hologram behind him lit up with an image that made half the audience recoil. A human barbecue, complete with sizzling steaks and happy families. Observe. Terrans not only consume other creatures, a practice some aggressive species share, but they have ritualized the process. They gather in groups to watch flesh cook over open flames. They have developed thousands of methods to prepare carcasses. They even compete over whose dead animal tastes superior. Several students in the front row looked decidedly unwell. One glimpse, a species that photosynthesized, had turned a shade of green that probably wasn't healthy. But the true horror, Kerflox continued, building his speech, is that they've concentrated this practice into portable forms. Flesh stripped from bones, treated with sodium chloride and various other chemicals, then desiccated into strips that can be carried anywhere. Anywhere. They could be carrying corpse strips right now. Elliot pulled out his bag of teriyaki beef jerky. The reaction was immediate, but eerily silent. 300 students held their collective breath, or whatever equivalent they had, watching as he tore open the package. The sound seemed to echo in the stillness. Mr. Graves, Professor Kerflock said, his theatrical boom replaced by genuine interest. Is that beef jerky? Teriyaki flavor. Want some? That is... For the first time since Elliot had met him, the professor seemed at a loss for words. You're consuming preserved flesh in my classroom. Again. Elliot tore off a piece and chewed thoughtfully. It's good protein. Protein? The word rippled through the crowd like a wave. Apparently, the concept of eating specifically for protein was novel. Penta Vlar, who had claimed a seat 3 rows up, but still within recording distance, raised a manipulator. Question: how often do Terrans engage in flesh consumption? Depends on the person. Some every day, some never. Never? Kerflox leaned forward. There are Terrans who don't consume flesh? Yeah, vegetarians and vegans. They just eat plants. Just plants. The professor's Shelrisai stopped moving. From your death worlds, they sustain themselves entirely on Death World flora. That's arguably more terrifying. How is that more terrifying? Elliot asked. Because it means your plants are so nutritionally dense and aggressive that they can sustain a sapient species alone. Do you have any idea what that suggests about their chemical composition? That they're vegetables? That they're weapons? Kerflox was clicking so rapidly now that it sounded like castanets. Everything on your planet is weapons. The flora, the fauna. You've weaponized your entire food chain.
Actually, Penta's monotone suit cut in. According to my research, humans also consume lactation fluids from other mammals.
The stillness that followed was deafening.
You drink the milk of other species?
A brave soul in the middle row asked. Elliot considered denying it, but the captain's strategic mind kicked in. No point in lying, son. Truth's stranger than fiction with these folks. Yes, Elliot said simply. Cow milk, goat milk, sheep milk. We make it into cheese, yogurt, ice cream. Stop! A Thrillix student near the door stood up, their feathers bristling. You're telling us that humans steal the nursing fluids of other creatures, process them, and eat them in multiple forms? Well, when you put it like that, how else should we put it? Taro asked from his spot near the window. Is there a non-terrifying way to describe stealing baby food from another species? We don't steal it, we farm. Elliot stopped. That probably wasn't better. Look, it's a mutual relationship. We take care of the animals, they provide milk. You've enslaved other species for their bodily fluids. Kerflox sounded almost impressed. That's remarkably efficient. Horrifying, but efficient. Tell them about honey, Glitch suggested with maniacal glee. Tell them how we steal insect vomit. Please, don't tell us about anything else, the Thrillix student pleaded. Actually, Elliot said, because apparently he had no self-preservation instinct. We also eat insect vomit. The Thrillix fainted. It's called honey, Elliot continued, addressing the room at large. Bees make it. It's sweet. We've been doing it for thousands of years. You've been stealing processed regurgitation from insects for millennia? Kerflox's voice had gone very quiet. And this is normal? Completely normal. We put it in tea. Tea? Penta asked, stylus poised. Boiled plant matter. Leaves specifically. You boil leaves and add insect vomit? Taro's questions were reaching peak incredulity. For enjoyment? This is a recreational activity? It's soothing. Boiled leaves are soothing? Yes. The class digested this, poor choice of words, in stunned silence. Elliot took the opportunity to eat another piece of jerky, which caused several students to flinch. Mr. Graves, Professor Kerflox said slowly, I'm beginning to suspect that everything we know about Terran culture is simultaneously completely accurate and completely wrong. That's probably fair. I'm also beginning to suspect that you've been underselling the terror of your species. We're really not that bad. You drink blood, don't you? The question came from Penta, whose gel form had gone very still. What? No. But you mentioned blood pudding yesterday. That's different. It's not, we don't drink it. It's cooked and it's mixed with grains and... Elliot stopped. Every explanation made it sound worse. It's a regional thing. A regional blood consumption thing? Kerflox's academic excitement had reached a fever pitch. Different human regions have different blood recipes? No! Yes, but... Fascinating. Do you have competitions? Blood preparation contests? Is there a blood season? Tell them about vampires, Glitch suggested. Really mess with their heads. There's no blood season, Elliot said firmly, ignoring Glitch. Most humans don't eat blood pudding. It's not that common. But some do? Taro asked. Some humans regularly consume blood? Mixed with grain? Cooked blood grain? Can we please talk about something else? Yes. Kerflox clapped his primary hands together. Let's discuss the semester project. Elliot relaxed slightly. Finally, something normal. As you know, the Grand Intergalactic Cultural Exchange Fair is in 3 weeks. Each group will present an aspect of their species' culture. Food, art, music, history, anything that captures your people's essence. That sounded reasonable. Pleasant, even. I've taken the liberty of assigning groups based on, let's call it academic interest. Kerflox's Shelversay clicked in his version of a smirk. Mr. Graves, you'll be working with Miss Vlar and Mr. Taro. Elliot looked at his assigned partners. Penta's gel was churning with what looked like excitement, while Taro had somehow pressed himself even flatter against the wall. Your topic, Kerflox continued, clearly savoring the moment, will be a celebration of Terran culture. I expect a full presentation with samples. Samples? Elliot asked weakly. Food samples, beverage samples, whatever you Deathworlders consume for entertainment. The professor's eyes glittered. I'm particularly curious about this coffee substance I've been reading about. The one that contains a neurotoxin you've become so addicted to that withdrawal causes severe physiological symptoms. It's not... Elliot began, then gave up. Sure, coffee. We can do coffee. Excellent. I expect great things. Terrifying things, but great nonetheless. As the class dispersed, Taro and Penta approached Elliot with the caution of bomb disposal experts approaching unexploded ordnance. So, Penta's suit announced, we're partners now. This will be fascinating. Or fatal. Probably both. Probably both? Taro added. Should we meet tomorrow? To discuss our death presentation? Cultural presentation? Library? Elliot suggested. It's neutral ground. Neutral ground is good, Taro agreed. Less likely to be contaminated? With Deathworld substances? As they parted ways, the Whisperer finally spoke up, its voice like static in Elliot's mind. They're afraid of you. I know, Elliot muttered. Good, Glitch countered. Fear is respect. We're basically royalty now. We're a circus act, the captain corrected. But that's fine. Circus acts can become something more. Play the long game, son. Elliot headed back to his dorm, wondering how he'd gone from being the quiet transfer student to the star of a xenobiological horror show. At least his partners seemed more curious than terrified. Well, slightly more curious than terrified. It was a start. The university's biodomes were one of the few places on Proxima Hub where Elliot felt almost at home. Each dome replicated a different biosphere from various worlds, creating a patchwork of environments that shouldn't exist in the same space. The Terran dome was, predictably, quarantined behind 3 separate airlocks and required special permission to enter. Are those necessary? Elliot asked, gesturing at Penta and Taro's full environmental suits. Is survival necessary? Taro replied, his voice muffled by 3 layers of protective gear. Your entire dome is classified as a navigational hazard? That seems excessive. The plants produce oxygen at toxic levels? Taro consulted his wrist display. There are insects that inject venom? Birds that could theoretically carry diseases? This is a death trap? It's a garden. Death garden, Penta corrected, their suit making mechanical whirring sounds as they walked. My sensors are detecting over 19 different atmospheric compounds that would be lethal to my species. Those are called flower scents. Death scents. Elliot gave up and led them down a path between Earth-normal oak trees and imported gardens. The dome was about half the size of a standard habitat block, but the designers had done an impressive job. There was even a small apple orchard in the northeast section, though the apples were kept behind an additional containment field with warning signs in 12 languages. Why are we here exactly? Penta asked, their gel swirling nervously as a butterfly landed on their helmets. Is that creature attempting to breach your suit? Taro had pressed himself against Elliot's side. Should we run? Can we run? Is running advisable? It's a butterfly. It's harmless. Harmless Death World creatures don't exist? We need ingredients, Elliot explained, ignoring the question. Real ingredients. Not the synthetic stuff from the cafeteria. If we're gonna make a proper apple pie to represent my culture, we need proper soil-grown apples. You want us to help you harvest death fruit? Penta's translator somehow conveyed deep concern, despite its monotone. That seems like participation in our own demise. Think of it as research. Hands-on xenobiology. Hands-on death? Elliot approached the containment field around the apple trees. The warning signs were almost comical in their severity. Skull symbols, biohazard markers, and what appeared to be a stick figure dissolving. He input his human-specific access code, and the field shimmered and parted. Stay here, he told his companions. I'll get the apples. Gladly, Taro said, taking several steps back. We'll observe from a safe distance? Is here safe? Should we move farther back? Elliot walked among the trees, breathing in the familiar scent of apple blossoms and earth. It had been months since he'd been here. The paperwork required for each visit was extensive. He carefully selected a dozen good apples, a mix of Granny Smiths for tartness and Honeycrisps for sweetness. The trees aren't attacking him? Taro observed, sounding disappointed. I expected more aggression? Perhaps the trees recognize him as a fellow Death World organism, Penta suggested, recording everything. A symbiotic relationship between predators. Trees aren't predators, Elliot called back. Death World trees are? Taro countered. They produce toxic fruit? That's predatory? Tell them about Venus flytraps, Glitch suggested gleefully. Really blow their minds. Some earth plants, do eat insects, Elliot admitted, immediately regretting it as both his companions stumbled backward. Plants that consume flesh? Penta's suit's volume spiked. You have carnivorous flora? Just small insects. That's how it starts? Tara was backing toward the exit. First, insects? Then small mammals? Then us? Plants don't eat people. Death World plants might? Elliot gathered his apples in a biosafe container, station regulations, and rejoined his terrified companions. Let's check the other domes. We need flour, sugar, butter. Butter? Penna interrupted. That's the solidified lactation fat, correct? Yes. We're making a pie from death fruit and the compressed fat of enslaved animals. And sugar, Elliot added helpfully. Which is? Taro asked with evident dread. Crystallized plant blood, basically. Both aliens stopped walking. Your dessert, Penta said slowly, is made from toxic fruit, mammal fat, and plant blood. And cinnamon. Which is? Tree bark. Ground up tree bark. Of course it is. Penta's gel had formed into what looked like a question mark. Why wouldn't Deathworlders eat trees? They visited 3 more domes, collecting ingredients. The Altarian dome had something that could work as flour, a ground tuber that was bland enough to be safe for most species. The Nexus dome provided a butter substitute, made from something Elliot didn't ask too many questions about. The sugar came from the Felixian dome, where a sympathetic plant keeper gave them synthetic sucrose with the only minimal lecturing about human poison consumption. Cinnamon's gonna be harder, Elliot mused, checking his list. Can't you make death pie without tree bark? Taro asked hopefully. It wouldn't be the same. Good? Taro said. Different is good? Less death-focused? Elliot was about to give up when he spotted something in the Xerxes dome. A tree with aromatic bark that smelled almost right. The attendant, an elderly moss being, watched with interest as Elliot carefully scraped off a small section. You're the Deathworld human everyone's talking about, they rustled. The one who eats poison for lunch. That's me. Fascinating. Your species' relationship with toxins is quite remarkable. Almost admirable, in a terrifying way. Thanks, I think. Are you really making a traditional Deathworld food for the cultural exchange? Trying to. My partners are... Elliot glanced at Penta and Taro, who were standing as far from the Xerxes tree as possible, while still being technically in the dome. Cautious. Sensible of 'em. The moss being rustled again, which might have been laughter. But also limiting. Fear prevents understanding. Try telling them that. I just did. Moss beings communicate through pheromone releases. Your companions are now slightly less terrified. Really? Yes. They are breathing more normally, which is progress. By the time they returned to the dormitory kitchen, a communal space that cleared out the moment other students saw what Elliot was carrying, they had most of what they needed. Elliot had raided his personal stash for the rest. Real earth flour he'd been saving, actual cinnamon, and precious vanilla extract that had cost him a week's credit allowance. Now, he said, arranging everything on the counter. We bake. We create death food, Penta corrected, setting up her recording equipment. For science. For cultural exchange. Death cultural exchange. Stop putting death in front of everything. Stop making everything potentially lethal? Taro suggested. The actual baking process was surprisingly therapeutic, even with Taro asking increasingly panicked questions and Penta narrating everything like a documentary about chemical weapon manufacturing. Now he's combining the lactation fat with the crystallized plant blood, Penta intoned, while their recorder hummed. Note the careful ratios. Too much of either could presumably increase toxicity. Is the temperature important? Taro asked, watching the oven preheat. Are you denaturing the proteins? Making them more deadly? Less deadly? Differently deadly? I'm making them delicious. Death delicious. I swear to... Elliot caught himself. Just watch. He showed them how to peel and slice the apples from a safe distance using tongs they'd borrowed from the chemistry lab. The pie crust came together beautifully, though Penta's description of it as a structural matrix designed to contain volatile compounds was less than appetizing. The filling smells... Taro paused, his nose, or whatever passed for it, twitching. Not terrible? Almost pleasant? Is that the toxins becoming airborne? It's the cinnamon and the sugar caramelizing. The tree bark and the plant blood are undergoing a chemical reaction. Penta's gel swirled faster. That's either brilliant or terrifying. Both, the captain said in Elliot's head. Good cooking is always both. Tell them we should add ice cream, Glitch suggested. Really complete the dairy theft theme. The Whisperer just hummed anxiously, which it had been doing since they started baking. When the pie finally came out of the oven, golden brown and bubbling at the edges, even Elliot had to admit it looked impressive. It also looked, from a certain perspective, like a containment unit for biological weapons. It's moving, Taro observed. The contents are actively bubbling. Is it alive? Did we create life? It's just hot fruit juice. Sentient fruit juice? No. Are you sure? Deathworld fruit might gain sentience when heated? Elliot cut a slice, the steam rising in aromatic clouds that made both his companions step back. He took a bite, closing his eyes at the familiar taste of home. His grandmother would have been proud. Well, Penta asked, are you dying? I'm experiencing joy. Death joy? Regular joy. The kind that comes from eating something that reminds you of home. He cut 2 more small pieces. Try it. I can't eat solid food, Penta reminded him. My species processes nutrients through osmotic absorption. But I can analyze it. She produced a sensor wand and waved it over the pie. Fascinating. The heat has broken down several compounds, creating new molecular structures. The Maillard reaction has produced hundreds of flavor compounds. Flavor or toxins? Taro asked. On a death world, what's the difference? Penta replied, which was probably fair. Taro stared at his piece for a long moment. He poked it with a utensil. He sniffed it from 3 different angles. If I die, tell my clutch siblings I was brave. You're not gonna die. Death World famous last words. He picked up the piece and, in one quick motion, shoved it into his mouth. His large eyes went impossibly wider. He chewed slowly, deliberately. It's warm? He said after a moment. And sweet? But also not sweet? Complex. My mouth is experiencing multiple sensations? He paused. Is that normal? Should my mouth experience this many things? Am I having a reaction? You're tasting something with actual flavor. Death World flavor is intense? Taro took another small bite, this one less hesitant. It's making my brain interpret new patterns? Is this what your food always does? No wonder humans are insane. We're not insane. You eat things that rewire your neural patterns? Taro was on his 3rd bite now. That's the definition of insane? Or brilliant? Can something be both? Most Death World things are, Penta observed, still recording. This is excellent data. A Death World food that's actually pleasant, allegedly. You could analyze a small sample, Elliot suggested, through your suit's intake port. That would be incredibly dangerous. Penta's gel swirled thoughtfully, but also scientifically valuable. A small port opened on their suit's chest unit. A tiny sample. For science. Elliot carefully placed a fingernail-sized piece of pie into the port. There was a soft hissing sound as it was processed. The reaction was immediate. Penta's gel swirled in patterns Elliot had never seen before. Spirals and starbursts and what looked like tiny fireworks. "Oh," their translator said. Then, after a long pause, the mechanical voice seemed to carry an inflection of awe. "Oh. Are you okay?" Elliot asked, concerned. "I'm experiencing very much. The compounds they're interfacing with my consciousness in unexpected ways. Is this what taste is like for solid food consumers?" "Pretty much." "Death Worlders experience this regularly? Multiple times per day? No wonder you're all insane. This is overwhelming. Also, wonderful. Wonderfully overwhelming." They spent the rest of the evening in the kitchen, Taro asking increasingly specific questions about Earth cuisine, while Penta documented everything. Other students peered in occasionally, drawn by the smell, though none were brave enough to enter. "This could work," Elliot said eventually. "For the presentation, we make pie, explain the cultural significance, maybe brew some coffee." Poison pie and neurotoxin drinks? Taro had finished his third piece. "It's terrifyingly perfect?" "We'll need to include warnings," Penta added, her gel still occasionally sparking in pleasure. "Extensive warnings. Possible medical waivers." "It's just pie." "Death World pie," both aliens corrected simultaneously. "Which is the best kind?" Taro added, then looked surprised at himself. "Did I just compliment Death World cuisine? Am I being converted? Is this Stockholm Syndrome?" "It's appreciation for good food." Death World Stockholm Syndrome, then. As they cleaned up, Elliot felt something he hadn't experienced since arriving at the station. A sense of belonging. Sure, his friends thought his food was poison and his planet was a death trap, but they were his friends. They'd eaten his pie. They'd survived his pie. They'd even enjoyed it. "Same time tomorrow?" Penta asked as they prepared to leave. "We should practice the coffee demonstration. I want to record the brewing process from multiple angles." "And taste it?" Taro added hopefully. "For science? Not because I'm developing a Death World addiction?" "Sure," Elliot said, smiling. "Fair warning, though. Coffee is stronger than pie." "Stronger than death fruit in a grain prison?" Taro's eyes widened. "That's terrifying." "Terrifyingly delicious," Penta corrected. "I'm beginning to understand Death World logic. It's about surviving things that should kill you and finding joy in the process." That's actually pretty accurate," Elliot admitted. "Of course it is. I'm going to get top marks on my paper about you." Penta's gel swirled in satisfaction. Working title, My Friend, the Poison Eater, a xenobiological study of interspecies bonding through shared trauma. That's terrible. Death World terrible or regular terrible? Both. Perfect. After they left, Elliot sat alone in the kitchen with the remains of the pie. The captain's voice rumbled in his head. Good work, soldier. You've established a beachhead.
We made friends!
Glitch added excitedly. Friends who think we're terrifying. The best kind. Even the Whisperer seemed calm, its usual anxious hiss reduced to a gentle whisper. For the first time since arriving at the Greater Galactic University, Elliot felt like he might actually make it through the semester. Maybe even enjoy it. As long as nobody asked about chocolate. He wasn't ready to explain that humans ate something that could kill half the galaxy species. That was a crisis for another day. The 3 weeks leading up to the Grand Intergalactic Cultural Exchange Fair were a blur of baking, brewing, and frantic research. News of the delicious poison pie had spread, and their dorm room became an unofficial and highly intimidating tasting room. Taro grew more confident, even offering his own critiques, while Penta amassed a mountain of data based on the psychological effects of Terran cuisine on various species. Elliot, for his part, found himself becoming an unlikely cultural ambassador, explaining the difference between a cobbler and a crumble to beings who thought fruit was supposed to be a weapon. The fair itself had taken over the university's main assembly hall, which transformed it into a maze of booths, displays, and demonstration areas. Species from across the galaxy had set up elaborate presentations. The melodic crystals from Harmony 7 constructed a sound garden that created symphonies from light. The Shapers of Ocularis had a booth where reality shifted every few seconds. The Avians from Corvus Nebula, including the insufferable Chiracs, had built a towering spire of crystallized song that hummed with their ancestral memories. And then there was the Terran booth. It looks like a quarantine zone, Taro observed, not incorrectly. They'd been assigned a corner spot. Whether for safety or to minimize exposure, Elliot wasn't sure. Penta had insisted on adding warning signs in 37 languages, which didn't help the aesthetic. The centerpiece was a simple table with a coffee maker, cups, and the apple pie they'd made that morning, now perfectly cooled and looking deceptively innocent. "We need more visual appeal," Penta said, their gel swirling critically. "Other booths have holograms, soundscapes, interactive displays. We have potentially lethal baked goods." "And coffee," Elliot added, setting up the machine. "Don't forget the neurotoxin." How could we forget the neurotoxin? Taro was wearing what he called casual protective gear, just gloves and safety goggles today. Should we add more warnings? Caution, death world sustenance, consume at your own risk, not responsible for evolutionary awakening? The last one might actually attract people, Glitch suggested in Elliot's head. Make it sound mysterious. "No one's going to come," the Whisperer hissed anxiously. "They'll all avoid us. We'll be the outcasts of the fair." "Stand proud, soldier," the captain ordered. "We're representing Earth. Show them what Death Worlders are made of." The fair officially opened, and within minutes, the assembly hall was packed. Everyone gave their booth a wide berth, though Elliot noticed plenty of curious glances and not so subtle pointing. "The Death World booth," he heard someone whisper. "The human who eats poison is there." "I heard he consumed flesh in Professor Kerflox's class." "My spawn sibling said he drinks the blood of his enemies." "That's coffee," Elliot called out. "I drink coffee, not blood." This clarification didn't seem to reassure anyone. An hour passed. While other booths had crowds of interested visitors, theirs remained conspicuously empty. Chirac strutted by with a group of admirers, his feathers gleaming. "How's the Death World exhibition going?" he trilled. "Terrifying everyone into submission? Oh, wait, they'd have to get close enough first." At least our culture doesn't involve preening for 3 hours every morning, Elliot muttered. What was that? Nothing. Enjoy your songs. I will. They don't contain lethal compounds. Chirax and his group moved on, laughing in that peculiar warbling way of his species. I want to throw coffee at him, Glitch said. Watch him molt in panic. We're not weaponizing beverages, Elliot said under his breath. Are you talking to yourself again? Penta asked. Should I document this? Death World psychological coping mechanisms? I'm fine. Fine is relative, Taro suggested. Death World fine is probably everywhere else's crisis. Professor Kerflox approached their booth, his Shellrasai clicking with what might have been amusement. Well, well, the Death World display. I see you've managed to keep the casualties to a minimum. No one's even tried anything yet, Elliot admitted. Of course not. You're presenting concentrated Death World cuisine. The survival instinct is strong in most species. He peered at the pie. Although, I must admit, it looks less immediately threatening than I expected. Would you like to try some? Absolutely not. I have a healthy respect for my continued existence. He paused. However, I will observe. For academic purposes, someone will eventually be brave enough, or foolish enough. On a Death World, what's the difference? He positioned himself at what he probably considered a safe distance, all 6 eyes focused on their booth. Great, Elliot sighed. Now we have a vulture. A what? Penta asked. A Death World carrion bird that circles dying things. Of course your world has specialized death watchers, Taro said. Why wouldn't it? Another hour passed. Elliot had started eating the pie himself out of boredom when a small figure approached their booth. It was a miniature, a species barely 30 centimeters tall, with wings that beat in a blur and enormous latticed eyes. They hovered at the edge of their space, curiosity evident in their rapid wing beats. Is it true? The miniature asked, their voice high and tinkling. You're from the Death World? You eat the forbidden fruit? It's just an apple, Elliot said gently. And yes, I'm from Earth. My hive mother says Death Worlders are giants who consume everything in their path. I mean, I'm pretty tall by some standards, but I don't consume everything. Just most things? Taro added unhelpfully. Death World stomachs can process almost anything? The miniature flew closer, hovering near the pie. It smells interesting, sweet, but also dangerous. The danger is mostly imaginary, Elliot said. He cut a tiny sliver, barely bigger than a crumb. Would you like to try? It's very small. What are you doing? Penta's translator screeched. You can't give Death World food to a miniature, the mass ratio alone. But the tiny being had already darted forward and grabbed the crumb. They popped it into their mouth before anyone could stop them. Everyone, Elliot, Penta, Taro, and the watching Professor Kerflox, held their breath. The miniature's latticed eyes went wide. They did a little loop in the air, then another, then burst into what Elliot recognized as laughter. It's amazing, they squeaked. It's like flying through a sunset made of flavor. My whole mouth is experiencing things. Is this what Death Worlders feel like all the time? Pretty much, Elliot said, grinning. No wonder you're all insane. This is fantastic. The miniature zipped away, then came back with 5 others from their hive. You have to try this. The Death Worlder has flavor bombs. Within minutes, word had spread. If a miniature, one of the most delicate species in the galaxy, could survive Death World cuisine, maybe it wasn't instantly lethal. A crowd began to gather. "Form an orderly queue," Penta announced, taking charge with characteristic efficiency. "Small samples only. Sign the medical waiver. Have your emergency contacts ready." "It's pie, not a plasma weapon," Elliot protested. "Death World pie," the crowd murmured in unison, which was starting to become a catchphrase. Elliot cut tiny pieces, while Taro manned the coffee machine, having practiced the brewing ritual until he could do it while maintaining safe distance. Penta documented everything, their gel swirling with excitement. The reactions were universally dramatic. A crystalline resonated at 3 different frequencies after tasting the cinnamon. A cloud form had to reconstitute themselves twice after the apple filling caused what they called molecular joy. Even a dour Graviton admitted the coffee was acceptably stimulating, though they immediately went to lie down. "This is unprecedented," Professor Kerflox muttered, his Shalrasei clicking rapidly as he took notes. "Voluntary consumption of Death World substances. Positive responses. No casualties. Yet," he added hopefully. Chirax returned with his entourage, clearly disturbed by the crowd at the Death World booth. "What's happening here? Mass hysteria? Mass appreciation?" Taro suggested. "Death World cuisine is surprisingly popular?" "Impossible. You're drugging them, using Death World pheromones or mind control." "It's called flavor," Elliot said. "Want to try some?" "I would never." "Coward!" squeaked a miniature, still doing happy loops from their pie experience. Chirax's feathers bristled. Being called a coward by something that could fit in his palm was apparently more than his pride could bear. "Fine. One small piece. When I prove it's toxic, this farce ends." Elliot cut a respectable slice, larger than what he'd been giving others, because Chirax was bigger and, frankly, because Glitch was chanting, "Poison the bird," in his head. Chirax took a bite. His feathers, which had been puffed in aggression, slowly settled. His eyes dilated. He took another bite, then another, until the entire slice was gone. "Well?" his friend asked. "It's..." Chirax struggled for words. "It's adequate." "Adequate?" Penta's gel formed question marks. "Your pupils dilated. Your feathers showed the pattern of pleasure. Your crop is demanding more." "It's Death World adequate," Chirax insisted. But he didn't leave. In fact, he stayed by the booth for the rest of the fair, claiming he was monitoring for delayed toxic effects, while secretly eyeing the remaining pie. By the end of the day, they'd served over 200 samples. The pie was gone. They'd gone through 3 pots of coffee, and Penta had enough data for a dozen papers. "We did it," Taro said, slumping in exhaustion. "We successfully poisoned a significant percentage of the student body? And they thanked us?" "We didn't poison anyone," Elliot corrected. "We shared culture. Through food." Death World culture. Through delicious poison. As they packed up, Professor Kerflox approached one more time. He looked around conspiratorially, then leaned in close. "The pie," he whispered. "Do you have any left?" "I thought you had a healthy respect for your continued existence." "I do, but I also have academic curiosity and His chalrisay clicked in what might have been embarrassment. Everyone seemed to enjoy it immensely. Elliot pulled out a small container he'd kept hidden. I saved you a piece. For science. The professor took it like he was handling unstable explosives. This never happened. If anyone asks, I was examining it for toxic compounds. Of course. Kerflock scuttled away with his prize, and Elliot could have sworn he heard happy clicking from around the corner. Did we just convert the entire university to Death World cuisine? Penta asked, their gel forms swirling in satisfaction. Seems like it, Taro agreed. Is this how Death Worlders conquer? Through flavor? The best kind of conquest, the captain rumbled approvingly in Elliot's head. We should open a restaurant, Glitch suggested. Glitch and Elliot's Death World Delights. We are not calling it that, Elliot muttered. Calling what that? Penta asked. Nothing, just thinking out loud. As they headed back to the dorms, Elliot reflected on the day. He'd come to the university as the weird human, the Death Worlder, the creature that ate poison for lunch, but somehow, through the universal language of good food or terrifying food, depending on the perspective, he'd found his place. Next week, Taro said as they walked, we should introduce them to chocolate? Chocolate's toxic to half the known species, Penta pointed out. So was apple pie, supposedly, Taro countered. Maybe Death World toxins are just misunderstood? Maybe, Elliot agreed, smiling. Or maybe we're all just a little insane. Death World insane, his friends said in unison. The best kind, they added, and Elliot couldn't disagree. The voices in his head were, for once, all in agreement. This was home. Not Earth, not the station, but this. Walking with friends who thought he was terrifying, but liked him anyway. Planning to share more poison with the galaxy. Being accepted. Not despite his weirdness, but because of it. Hey, Penta said suddenly. Do Death Worlders really have a dish made from rotten fish? Oh no, Elliot groaned. How did you find out about surströmming? The xenobiology database. It says humans bury fish until it liquefies, then eat it. That can't be real? It's culturally significant to certain regions. Death World regions? Taro asked with interest. The most death parts of the Death World? Something like that. We're presenting that next year, Penta announced. The fermented death fish of Terra. Absolutely not. Think of the academic value. Think of the smell. Death smell, both aliens said excitedly. Elliot laughed. Really laughed for the first time in months. The sound echoed through the station corridors, causing a few passing students to nervously scatter. Apparently, Death Worlder laughter was still terrifying, but his friends didn't even flinch.